propagation of exceptions and unhandled exceptions. An unhandled exception is an easy one to explain. It means it's not handled by your SQL code. It is not trapped in a loop, such as when you take this out and you have any kind of exception. It is actually trapped by the calling program, which happens to be, in this case, SQL Developer. And it's passed back to Oracle, popped up on the screen, and it looks rather ugly. Well, it can, technically. Let's get this out of here. A propagated, well, what is intended by the use of the word propagation of exceptions is the scope of exceptions. Look at this piece of code here. I've got declaration, and I've got a begin loop here. I need to stretch this a little bit. I have one begin loop here, or one begin structure, and another one. This exception here applies within this block of begin-end code. This exception here applies within this block unless this one overrides it within this section here. So if there is an error here on this select statement, which in this case, because of this code, there will be, this exception, no data found, will actually be ignored. It will pop out to the end of this thing here, this end statement thing, and it will execute this piece of code. If an exception happens to occur outside of this begin-end loop, it will actually go into here. So by trapping this exception loop in here, it actually ignores the exception further up. Notice that this is null. It means do nothing. In other words, go to the end and continue to the dbms output command when you have an exception. So if this was not an exceptional situation and it gave me a row, the execution from the select statement would drop through to the end. If it was, it would still drop through to the end because the exception is ignored by the null statement and the when others trap. Exception when others trap means trap everything. So if I run this particular piece of code, I should get the answer I expect, which is because the act actually has nothing in it, because we are searching for something that doesn't exist, act ID by default is null. Here I'm saying NVL, if act ID is null, return the value 0, otherwise return act ID. Let's go back to Bob Dylan and run the piece of code again. And as you see, we get the answer 3, right here, right down here. Now, that shows you essentially exception trap propagation, or the scope of exception traps. In addition to what actually happens when you don't handle an exception, which was the error or the situation I showed you when I commented this out. When I run this error here, this produces an error. It will actually drop down to this particular block here because it's not handled in this block. No matter how many layers of begin-end block coding I put in here, I can wrap these inside each other without a problem. I can wrap this in here without a problem. It will still pick up on the error, on the exception down there because it's not trapped. So I can play this, and as you can see, comes out with error code 100, no data found, which is the content of this message down here and the dbms output. And then it's raised up to the next level. I could put an exception, for instance, in here. I could put another exception in here, which wouldn't be trapped because the error doesn't occur there. I could put something else in there, say dbms output, hey you. So I can build up multiple layers of these things. Sometimes it's useful when you're trying to ignore things like select statements that fail, you want execution to continue. It's rare, but it can be useful.